And we also do talk about 2013 in there as well. So yeah, if we head to the next slide, the idea behind it. So for our conference in October, Sharon Blease came up with the idea to sort of create some 30-second clips to show in the breaks, or sort of between presentations, just to sort of just to sort of commemorate the anniversary. But they were only going to be short clips, and then once I started to go and meet these people and hear their stories, the vast majority of them that remember it pretty well, I knew that 30 seconds wasn't going to be enough, so we increased that to 5 minutes. Then the feedback from those 5-minute videos, of which there are 3, was really, really positive. And then Sharon decided that we were going to go forward with a more feature-length documentary, which would then touch on 2013 and include the future as well. Next slide, please. So what was the aim? The aim really was just to commemorate the 70th and 10th anniversaries of the 1953 and 2013 floods, and also wanted it to be stories from people that were there and that remember it, or at least as subject matter experts. And then quickly, as I was filming, there were sort of key points that were being brought up by all of those talking about 1953 and then all of those talking about 2013. We say in 1953 there were little or no sea defences. There was no warning, no forecasting. Fast forward to 2013, we have sea defences. There was warning, there was forecasting, but there was still relatively serious destruction up and down in Norfolk and Suffolk. And then we also saw an opportunity to talk about the future, so to discuss the issues that we face and also to try and provoke conversation around it. Essentially, the issues are not going away, and as we know, with sort of climate change and increased sea levels and storminess, it's going to get worse and it's going to be more common. And then there was an opportunity to touch on resilient coasts and that resilient and adapted approach that sort of going to be taking more. Next slide, please. So these were the locations that we went to. So spoke to people in King's Lynn, Snettisham, your very own, well, our very own and your very own Brian Farrow. Spoke about North Norfolk, Lowestoft, Southwold and Felixstowe when it came to 1953, and then Wells next to sea, Walcott, Lowestoft and Snape when it came to 2013. Now I wish, because I love history, and I wish I could have made an hours long film, because Essex was seriously hit. Obviously the Netherlands had close to 2,000 deaths, and then there were a number of people that lost their lives at sea as well, which we didn't touch on, including the Guava off Lowestoft that I was made aware of online after the film. Next slide. Yeah, there's just some wonderful screen grabs. So some of the people in Norfolk that I spoke to, yeah, all fantastic. Next slide. So as a response, so it has been picked up by local cinemas, which is quite humbling. Southwold put on 2 showings because the first one sold out. Woodbridge we had last Monday, sort of a premiere of sorts. We had our film and another local film about the River Deben shown with a Q&A afterwards, and that was really well attended with over 200 people. And then in future, we're looking at Lowestoft Marina have got in touch saying that they want to show it, but possibly in sort of cut up a little bit, as to be shown as sort of shorts. Lungard Fort in Felixstowe as well. Would like to show it as well, sort of cut up in shorts, and we're sort of in discussions with them. 3,000 views on YouTube, which is fantastic for us. And overwhelmingly positive as well. So it was used by the Environment Agency. They used it in part of their 1953 commemoration sort of social media sort of posts, which is nice, good bit of interagency collaboration. And then, yeah, as I say, very well received on social media. So whilst a lot of people were interested in the oral history, sort of Suffolk and Norfolk, there were some geography type Twitter accounts that really got started on conversation about climate change, and they particularly focused on the coastal line versus coastal zone and things like that. And then it did get people clicking on what CPE does as well, which is a nice internal positive. Next slide, please. So special thanks. So I see Richard Powell's on today. Huge thank you to Richard Powell. So it was all internally sort of created, but there were some small costs that the Anglian Eastern Regional Flood and Coastal Committee kindly contributed towards. He also takes part in a discussion with Karen Thomas where they're walking along Pakefield Beach, talking about the future, and that's a really interesting conversation. It actually lasted for about half an hour, and somehow I had to cut it down to about 10 minutes. And the whole thing was fascinating. So thank you to him. The Environment Agency lent us David Kemp, who sort of introduced 1953 and 2013, absolute, well, yeah, brain the size of something massive. And yeah, support and help in showing the film, but also parish councils and local community groups. So some of the local councillors were putting me in touch with people, and yeah, that was fantastic. And then of course the participants themselves, because yeah, it's their stories that we told. And then yeah, internally, so it was myself that filmed, edited and produced it, but Sharon Richardson was fantastic, helping me with the final edits. And then sort of the big thank you is to Sharon Blease, who came up with the initial idea, provided fantastic support throughout, including sort of taking the lead on promotion, and essentially she had the final say on the film as well. So so yeah, next slide please. There we go. Yeah, so where to watch it. So we do have two versions due to sort of copyright sort of restrictions with the archive footage. So there's a public version that's available on YouTube. There's a link there. I don't know if these slides are being available afterwards, but you can click on the link, or if you just search A Surge of Memories on YouTube, you should find it. If there are any sort of community groups, schools, any local cinemas or community cinemas that want to show the slightly longer version but has the archive footage that does make a massive difference to sort of the tone of the film, then yeah, please get in touch and we'll provide that to you. There is a small fee that's payable when we show it, which is why we can't just hand it out sort of to everybody, but we cover that fee. So yeah. And that's it. I've rattled through it.
Right. Thank you very much, James. Yes, I can think of some parishes that would very much like to see the longer version of the film. Certainly, and I put those to my seaside parishes.
Yeah. Just send me an email. So it's just first name dot last name at eastsuffolk.gov.uk.
Right, thank you very much, James. Does anybody have any questions for James? James, you're getting away lightly as well.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, breathe a sigh of relief there. Okay, so we're going on to section 6, which is the Coastal Transition Accelerator Program updates, and that's going to be presented to us by Rob Goodliff. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. Can you all hear me okay?
You're good for me as well. No.
Excellent. Oh, thank you. I see Noel's got his thumbs up, so nice to see you, Noel. So excellent, super. Right, okay, I'm going to give you a quick update on the Coastal Transition Accelerator Programme in North Norfolk. I know I've spoken about this before, but I'm just going to touch into sort of where it comes from, just to start with, just to remind everybody, and then I'll talk through where we've got to, talk through some of the core sort of work packages that we're looking to take forward. And then sort of around the next steps. And for some reason, my dog's just woken up and is making all sorts of noise behind me in her dog bowl. So apologies if you can hear that in the background. Okay, but just as a reminder as well, the programme It focuses on the eroding coast between Kellinghard, which is near Weybourne, and Cart Gap down at Haysborough. And it's all about sort of developing ways to help manage and facilitate coastal transition, or what we sort of used to call coastal adaptation. So essentially, where the coast is or will change, so erode sort of into the future. Okay, so if we go on to the next slide, please, Tom. Excellent. So I'm just going to start here. So as part of the process we've been going through, outline business case, we were asked to look at, well, what's the business as usual? And as we know, it's quite reactive. And in Norfolk and Suffolk, we're actually probably more advanced than many locations. But these are some of the things where we are at the moment. We do have information available with shoreline management plans, with policies, risk maps, and we do have web resources. We've got some really good planning policies, actually, looking at rollback and relocation of assets at risk and what's appropriate or inappropriate to be in sort of the coastal change risk management areas. We do have access to coastal erosion assistance grants for some residential properties. So if you bought your property before, I think it's June 2009, you can access these, which are there to help with demolition costs. But businesses aren't included, and residential properties covered later aren't. And as a local authority, we'll provide demolition assistance and advice. And we'll also provide housing advice to those who might be losing their homes. And if there's guidance or any other resources available, we might provide sort of wider guidance. But as we know, sort of where we've got coastal change, this isn't enough. So if we go on to the next slide. So back in 2020, the government adopted a flood and coast government policy, and this was closely followed by the Environment Agency's flood and coast strategy. And following on from that, we've now got the Flood and Coast Innovation Programme. This has had various different names sort of over the last year or so, but this is what it's settled on now, and it's broken into three parts. So one is for £150 million for Flood and Coast Resilience Innovation Programme, which is where the Resilient Coast Project, which Charles is going to speak about in a few minutes, comes in. There's £8 million for Environment Agency areas, such as the Humber, which is looking at adaptation pathways. The remaining funds is going to this Coastal Transition Accelerator programme. Now, DEFRA then identified two locations in England, so that's East Riding of Yorkshire and North Norfolk, as the two locations that they want to take forward on coastal transition. And that's because from their calculations, they've got the most number of residential properties at risk in the shorter term. So that's where this coastal transition funding is coming from. So if we just move to, we'll just move to the next slide, Tom. Super. Okay. So the objectives or the outcomes that we're looking to get is to generate lots of learning. So that's what the government would like us to do. So to learn how to work in coastal locations with erosion, and what do we need to do to help those locations sort of transition from a coastal erosion risk. But in doing so, they very much want us to be delivering sort of practical action, so making a difference. And some of those eligible actions, they're around on the left-hand side of the screen. So the things that they're asking us to look at is asset and property rollback, so moving things from risk, providing solutions for the infrastructure which is at risk, repurposing land and assets which might be in the risk zone, and working with communities and businesses to be better prepared. They want us to look at planning policies and other sort of links to local policies about how they can link into sort of shoreline management plans to enable us to transition in the future. And they would like us to try and work out ways that we can make this more sort of sustaining, self-financing, sort of moving forward to the future. So it's not totally reliant on sort of further sort of schemes such as this. So it becomes the business as usual. And ultimately, we've been asked to develop a coastal transition plan for location. What we're told we're not allowed to do is we're not allowed to build traditional sea defences. and we're not allowed to provide compensation. So they're the two bits we've been told we can't do. So we've got a number of different outputs in North Norfolk that we're looking to deliver. One of those is a strategic coastal transition plan, which will be supported with sort of more local transition plans, which we'd like to co-develop with communities or different sectors, and developing around this sort of a manual about how we go about doing this. But a key part of this is then taking all of those things and identifying the sort of practical actions and demonstrating those. I'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment. All this will develop lots of learning, which we can then share sort of nationally to other local authorities. And we'll also learn about what would work on a more national scale, but also what the blockers might be. So we want to be able to go back to government and saying these things work. So therefore, if we have the right policies and funding in place, we can continue to do these. Or it might be that these things work, but this needs changing, or we need new legislation or something else to help support this moving forwards. So we need to be able to go back to government to share that. So I'm going to go on now and talk a little bit about the sort of the core work packages that we've identified. So if we go to the next slide, Tom. So the key work packages are along the top of the screen. So we're just going to take these one by one, and I'm going to just quickly sort of talk through these. So the first one is something we've called transition plans and approach. Now, we've been told to do a transition plan, but what we don't have is a definition of, well, what is a coastal transition plan? So what we'd like to do is to sort of find some examples. There are examples worldwide within this field and with other fields. And what are they doing? What can we learn from that? But also, what do we need to do sort of moving forward? And who's it for? What does it need to do? We also have got lots of knowledge around coastal transition or coastal adaptation. We did the coastal pathfinders, and just a moment. Excuse me, I'm just going to let the dog out because it is running around my feet. Hang on a second. Apologies. That's better. Super. Apologies. Okay. So consolidating that transition knowledge. So there's lots of learning out there, and we'd like to pull this all together into one place, but then we can identify the gaps in that knowledge, and then identify where we need to do further work to develop that knowledge and to fill in those gaps. From that we can develop a sort of research projects, and this could include all sorts of things. We know, for example, that for a lot of the environment agency grants, we need to have a better understanding what carbon impacts are going to be. So we need to do work around that. The mental health impacts around the coast can be quite significant, and there's lots more interest in that area at the moment. So is there anything that we need to do or could support or link into to investigate some of these? There's quite a bit of interest in around the valuation of sediment, for example. So where sediment is being released in one locality, what's the value of that to the adjacent and downdrift communities? Likewise, where it's being held by sea defences, what's the cost to those communities? So there's all sorts of different research areas that potentially we could sort of take forward and investigate further. So next slide, please, Tom. So there's an area of work around people and places and being prepared moving forwards. Now, the CTAP programme is about learning, and we need to be able to evidence this and evidence the changes and benefits that we're doing. So we need to initially sort of underpin what we're doing with understanding about localities. So it's about collecting information on that, but it's also about how we share that and might use that. So for example, we're working with Charles actually in the Resilient Coast Project, looking at coastal mapping and how data can be inputted and potentially shared. I'm not going to talk about that because I'm sure Charles will do in a moment. And it's also how ready are we as an authority or as communities, how ready are we to look at transition? And this will then link into sort of wider work the environment agents have been doing. We want to then have discussions around how we're going to work together. So how can the North Norfolk District Council work with local communities or different parts of our coast? How's it best that we work together to try and co-create a way forwards? And we could then look to explore different localities or different sectors. So locations along our coast, for example, Trimmingham or Haysborough, different sectors. So it could be agriculture, it could be holiday parks. So exploring those areas and what the issues are, what the hopes, possible dreams might be around those areas. So we can have full understanding. And then from that, we can then co-create a transition plan and identify what actually do we need to do to take forwards in the short, medium, maybe long term to enable us to continue to thrive on our coastline. And then there's this sort of another element, which is then looking around sort of our coastal understanding, our coastal literacy. So how do we sort of raise everybody's awareness of actually what's going on the coast, how the coast works, what are the processes, what are the challenges? And this is from, maybe elected members through to local communities, maybe with schools, young people, different sectors of society. How do we raise that understanding so that we can hopefully together make good choices and get better solutions for the future? So if we move to the next slide, Tom, this is kind of really a critical area of what we're looking to take forward. So once we've had discussions and we've sort of developed sort of transition plans, it's about actually doing things and making a difference. A very early phase of this is an initial sort of grant package that we're currently putting together. We've been talking with a number of people on the coast, and they're already wanting to investigate rolling back properties, for example. So putting some things in place in the short term to enable them to move forward. So this is through sort of a fund for gaining professional services around legal or planning advice. It might be around sort of small practical adaptations to enable properties to continue to be functional whilst a rollback or relocation is looked into. But also potentially there might be wider communities wanting to take things forward to investigate specific challenges that there might be, or understanding around how whether something's driving coastal change or not, or it might be around arts projects to actually raise understanding. But we're trying to just put some initial things in place so people can start moving things forward whilst we sort of get going with the transition program. So areas of work actually in practical actions may be around securing land. That could be through purchasing or through agreements. It could also be through rolling properties back or preparing the infrastructure ready for rolling back, or repurposing assets which may be not used or could be used for other things within the coastal erosion risk zone. All of these things are going to be coming out of those discussions and those transition plans that we'll be doing in the people and place preparedness. We're also potentially looking at some other things which are less sort of physical on the ground, but which could be really supportive. So is there a way we could provide early warnings for erosion, or what mental health support could be required? We're also aware that there's some fundamental flaws in some systems. So for example, with property sales, often coastal erosion isn't flagged in the sales process for some property sales. So is that something that we can pick up through CTAP to explore a bit further? So next slide, please, Tom. And the final one is around funding and finance. So clearly through CTAP, there's funds to be used looking at coastal transition. But these funds are for a period of time. They're for 4 years, the next 4 years. So what happens after that? So what we'd like to do is to sort of develop the work that we've done previously as in Coastal Partnership East around the Coastal Loss Innovative Funding and Finance project, and working with the other CTAP and other FCRIP projects, looking at what funding and finance mechanisms are being looked at, but then sort of standing up and from that, standing back to say, well, actually, what could be scaled up to a national scale? Are there things that we could take forward which could help fund and finance these coastal transition actions moving forwards in North Norfolk, but also for more widely, sort of on a national context? So if we just go to the next slide, Tom. So the next steps. So there's obviously an awful lot that needs doing. And the first thing that we need to do is to get the full Environment Agency approval. So we're just at a point where we've drafted an outline business case for the Coastal Transition Accelerator programme. And we're hopefully going to be submitting that this week for them to appraise and then approve. We've got the initial support package, which we're currently in the process of developing, and we'd like to get to a point to be able to release that so people can then access those funds so they can start investigating areas where they would like to do that. Clearly, we need to develop a team. So we need to have the right people in place to help us deliver all of these different work packages. So that's one of the key things that we need to do next. And once we've got a team in place, we can then really start having conversations and wider conversations to move things forward. We need to come up with a better name. So Coastal Transition Accelerator Programme, it's a bit of a mouthful. So we're trying to come up with a better name for this, which we'd like to share with East Riding as well. Unfortunately, lots of the good names for coastal projects have already been used. So we're trying to come up with something different. So if you've got any ideas, please do send them on a postcard. And then we need to get started and we need to actually get going with this because we haven't got long to deliver all this. So the next slide, Tom, just to wrap up. So we started with sort of a reactive business as usual. And what we're trying to do is to get to a proactive business as usual. And here's some photographs of where coastal transition has happened in the past successfully, and there's lots of blank photographs there. And they're the ones that together we need to fill in. So we need to work out what the transition is going to look like, how we're going to do that, how we're going to co-create that. So up to the end of CTAP to 2027, but then also beyond. So really exciting program of work. Really looking forward to getting cracking actually on it, and to be able to start to have those conversations with the Norfolk coast and all involved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. Gosh, a lot to take in. Are there any questions for Rob? Adele.
Hi, Rob. Yeah, I've actually got two questions, if I may. The first just relates to the work packages that you mentioned. Are they the same for the CTAP in North Riding? And if so, are there any plans to do kind of shared learning and or collaborate? And then my second question related to the coastal literacy. I just wondered if there are opportunities there to link with the engagement work plan surrounding the SMP Explorer.
Excellent, thanks, Adele. Two great questions. So East Riding have developed their own sort of program for CTAP. It's based on all the same principles, so there are lots of similarities in there, but they'll have their own way of delivering that. Where we can, we are looking to link up with East Riding to do sort of shared work. So, for example, an area could be around the carbon accounting. That's an area where we're looking to work together, funding and financing. We're also not limiting it to East Riding as well. So there's areas with Resilient Coast with the CPE team where there's opportunities to link up. So again, with funding and financing, with mapping, etc. But there's also other partners out there. So we'll be looking to identify those moving forwards and to link into wider things that are going on. So yeah, great question. The other one on coastal literacy. Yeah, so the first part of this is to say, well, what's already there? What's going on? The SMP Explorer website is going to be obviously a good step forward for the shoreline management plans, and that will link into the new National Coastal Erosion Risk Mapping as well. So that's going to be critical. I don't think it's very straightforward at the moment to potentially change the scope of that piece of work for the SMP Explorer, but there could be things that we could be doing which could then complement that going forward. Hope that answers your question, Adele.
Okay.
Thank you, Adele. Thank you, Rob. Do we have any further questions? Just to talk quickly about to ask the psychological effects on those living close to the coast. I was interested in that, Rob. I was informed at a meeting last week in a conversation that apparently the church parishes are getting together to some extent to form some sort of pastoral care, especially on this subject. Have you heard anything about it?
Not specifically, Harry. It'd be good to pick up with you actually on that. That'd be great. I'm aware Mind are doing sort of climate cafes, etc., locally as well. So that might be another area where we can investigate as well.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. I think it's an underrated aspect of coastal erosion, and I think, yeah, we'll pick up on that, Rob. Okay, are there any more questions for Rob? If there are not, thank you very much, Rob. And we will move on now to a resilient coasts. And for this, we have Charles. So,
Hello.
Charles, up to you.
Thank you. Yeah, my name's Charles Krolik-Root. I'm a senior coastal resilience advisor working on the Resilient Coast project. This is our logo. If we could go on to the next slide, please. So Rob just gave a good sort of introduction to the way that the funding works. So we are an FCRIP project, but we're part of FSIP. There are 25 FCRIP projects, so these are the Flood and Coastal Resilience Innovation Projects. Our one is funded to the tune of 9.6 million from DEFRA. It's a 5-year project, so we've got about 4 years left. And our vision really for this project is to provide what we call a toolkit of options to enable people, economies, and the environment to transition to a climate resilient coast. So it's this sort of idea that we have a lot of information and we have things that we're gathering and work that we're doing, but it's this thinking around presenting it to the people and communities who live and work or operate on the coast, and giving them options how to deal with our dynamic coastline changes. So it's moving similar to the Rob's project. It's moving from a reactive situation into something that's a bit more proactive. And our legacy on this is this idea of a catchment-based approach to creating a resilient place. So I think the term catchment-based comes from flood risk a bit more, where it makes a bit more sense. So you would really be looking at the whole flood risk caption and sort of holistically, and looking at its needs and requirements and how parts of things that you do in one location might impact others. And we're really looking at the coastline in a similar way here. We're looking to think thoughts such as, how far do we come in from the coastline? How far does what's going on the coast influence inland? How does it impact businesses, the economy, tourism? And so there's lots and lots going on, and it's not just a case of thinking, well, okay, we're going to protect that property because that one's on the edge now, or we're going to protect this property because that is now the new front line. It's looking at things a bit more widely. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So how will we achieve this? So we've got 8 interconnected pieces of work, so work packages as part of this project. Tom, I apologize, I've made quite a few slides and they don't have much on them, so it's going to be fairly quick fire. But so if we go on to the first work package 1, this is to create a robust erosion risk map. So the idea of this is we need to know the locations along our coast which are at least risk, which are at the most risk, what that could look like in the long term, short term, medium term, what is highly likely, which is least likely, what is the worst case, what is the best case. And it's getting an understanding of that risk and how much time we might have in all locations along our frontages. So what we're doing with this is we're looking to perhaps use the Environment Agency's NCERM2 data, which stands for National Coastal Erosion Risk Map data, which is currently being refreshed, and we're looking to feed into that. But it is a national data set, so there will be an element of looking to enrich that with local knowledge that we gain, we already have, but also that we will be collecting throughout this project. And then, so that what that will look like in real terms is likely to be a map along our frontages showing different scenarios and what the rate of erosion could likely be. If we go on to the next one, it'll give you an idea of how that feeds in. So the coastal zone spatial plans. So from that recent work package I just ran through, we know where the risk is, what it is, but then we need to know what we actually have in the coastal zone. We need to know what that risk is impacting. So it's looking at what we call the assets and infrastructure at risk, but you might call it receptors in a flood risk setting. But what that is basically knowing all the buildings, services, infrastructure, utilities, everything that we have and where it is along our coast. So it's building up that picture of what is at risk. But we're looking to go sort of a bit step further than that, because we know that it's not just property and bricks and mortar and hardware and things like that along our coast. It's communities have a bit more value on these places. So there will be an element of gathering opinion and anecdotal information and thoughts really from communities when we come to work with them, and actually building in some value on that people place on certain things along the coast. And I think that is probably quite an innovative thing that we will be doing as part of this. So if we could go on to the next one, please. These two work packages we've linked together here. It's the adaptation funding mechanism and the integrated investment plan. So these are two sort of financial, I suppose, work packages. So the adaptation funding mechanism is really a different way of looking at the way that funds are distributed for coastal adaptation and dealing with erosion along the coast. So currently there are issues with the way that flood defence grant and aid works in the coast. It's difficult to get things to stack up because it's more, I would say, weighted towards flood risk, where you can build up damages through repeated floodings on the same property. But in our setting with erosion, once it's gone, it's gone. So that property does not, you don't gather up predicted increased costs over a longer time frame. Once that property has been demolished or falls over the edge, that's it. So it's really looking at different ways that we can approach that and try to put some recommendations in, I think, for the way that we deal with that in the future. And then the integrated investment plan is a bit different, and this, I think this is quite an interesting one, because we're looking to work with third-party organisations and partners and try and get an understanding of what their appetite is for making their assets more resilient. Because an example I would give would be, say you have 12 properties on the coast that are at risk of erosion, and then alongside them there is a electrical substation. The owner of that substation may choose to defend it. They might put some barriers in, they might put whatever means that they look to protect that. But is that worth doing should those properties have to be demolished because they're close to the cliff, because that services those properties? So it's really looking at ways that infrastructure providers might look to actually protect their customers a bit more, or they might want to link up with other infrastructure providers. So you might look at the telecoms company that services those properties as well, and what are they doing, and gas too, and everything. And it's really coming together in a bit of sort of out of the box thinking, rather than just let's protect our own things with our own money, and perhaps have a little pot of money that we can give out to projects here and there, and let's come together on this and think about it a bit, looking at the wider outcomes for what we're doing. If we go on to the next one, please, Tom. So yeah, the Community Resilience and Adaptation Engagement Toolkit. So this is looking at the ways that we work with communities and sort of take communities on a journey and almost align them as a partner. Well, certainly do align them as a partner with the way that we're working, because at the end of the day, they're sort of the client for this work, and we have to kind of, they're the people that we're looking to protect and work with and nurture. So it's not really a case of we're going to do this and we're going to do this to your community. It's how can we work with your community to achieve this. So this is going to be a set of tools to help communities adapt to these climate related risks that come out of various parts of academic work and also work that we're doing as part of this project. And the next one, please. So the costed asset management plan. This is what Karen mentioned a bit earlier. So this is looking at all of the options for our assets. So these are our defence assets, things such as groins along the coast. And it's looking at different ways of working with them. So for example, do they have a value after we've decommissioned them? If we do decommission them, so something like a groin could make an attractive architectural feature. It could be used as beams in a listed building, etc. But it's looking at different ways of thinking and getting the most out of the assets that we can. But then also looking at things like transitioning from hard to soft defences, and this idea mentioned earlier about storing materials for rapid implementation, such as in the Hemsby situation. So it's really looking as well, working with the other work packages on how we would achieve this. So with the spatial plan, we're looking at where could we stockpile this. With the funding work packages, we're looking at, well, okay, how could we gain investment in this? If the price of rock has gone up 350% in recent years, then is it worth investing in? Could we perhaps look at an investor who then we rent the rock off of them? And it's just different ways of thinking of approaching this, rather than, right, something's happened, we need to bring rock in on a barge, we need to get someone to place it. We can't do that until the tides are right, the weather's right, etc. And that's really interesting. That's a very key one, and that really ties into a lot of the other work packages. And the next one, please. Policy change. So I kind of see this as a bit of a sort of periscope looking up at the horizon around the rest of the project. Whilst all these pieces of work are going on, we need to look at the wider policy, what's happening coming up. Is there anything that's currently not working for us? So do we think bits of policy aren't working? Are we also maximizing what we can do within the current legislation? And also, are there existing pieces of policy and legislation, such as local plans? Is there a way that we can integrate land for rollback, for example, into that? Are there bits and pieces that we can do for that? And yeah, that's really sort of the broader, more strategic part of the project. And then the next one, please, which I think is the big one. So this is the Community Resilience Master Plans. So this really calls on the outputs from all of the other work packages. And this is where there will be a significant amount of working with the community to decide what they want the future to be over the next 20 years. We really want to be able to sort of say, this is the work we've done, this is what we know. We can hand it over to you, and you can work with us to make a decision on what a resilient future looks like. And because it has to work for everyone. And I think this is probably where we would see more involvement from community groups, parish councils, borough councils, councillors. And I really think this is quite this is the big outcome that the public, that means most to the public, I would say, rather than the bits and pieces of technical work that we're doing in the background that probably you could sit and talk to people in our industry for hours about it, but less so the people who live and work on the coast who are in need of the help a bit more. So the next slide, please. Where are we going to do all of this? So we've currently got 4 pilot sites, but we also are looking at adding another one in. So we've got 2 in Suffolk, which are Southwold and Thorpe Ness. The 2 I'll focus on today are Hemsby and Great Yarmouth, because we're talking about Norfolk. The 5th pilot site is Pakefield, which is also Suffolk, just south of Lowestoft. So these are going to act as the focus of our work, and where we actually put the work packages into practice. We've also got some twin sites. So these are Shotley in Suffolk, Winterton, Pakefield, and Corton and Gunton. These are where we could look at rolling out more work once we've started the work on the initial pilot sites. But there will be elements of what we're doing in the project that stretch around the entire frontage. So the risk mapping, the asset mapping, there's no harm really in the way that those projects work, that they can stretch across the whole frontage, because it is really just putting data in, analysing it, and bringing it out in its rawest form, I suppose. And that's where there will be a lot of link up with Rob's project, because if we're going to be carrying out this work, we might as well make sure that it works for the CTAP project too, and extend it around the coast. If we go on to the next one, I'm going to just run through a quick look at the Norfolk pilot sites. I mean, Karen filled you in on what has recently happened in Hemsby, which has been a very difficult situation, I think. And I'm not going to really add much more than what Karen's already said, but it is a holiday destination which brings in an estimated around 88 million through tourism annually. I've heard people refer to it as the sort of I think it was like the boarding room or something of North Norfolk, where a lot of people stay and then travel to these other tourism places. We know that the beach levels there fluctuate regularly. We've had significant erosion, as you're all aware of, and we've got, I think it's 1,900 tons of granite coming in to protect the access road on the Marrams. But the key thing here is the situation is immediate. And where Resilient Coast is currently feeding in is through the work of replacing this rock and thinking about what are we doing with this rock. It's not a long-term cure to the problem. Where could it likely be moved to in the future once threats are changed? What does getting a better understanding of what is actually happening at Hemsby and what will happen in the future. And I think having Hemsby as a pilot site on this project, really with such a strong community, I believe that around 400 residents recently attended a community meeting, and I think it's going to be a key pilot site that we can tap into and work with to come up with something going forward. And on to the next one, please. We've got a couple of photos which I took prior. These are from December, so you can see what the situation was like prior to the erosion recently. So I think those are from the left 2 are from Hemsby Gap. First one is looking north, the next one's looking south. And I believe the third one is the property that was rolled back on telegraph poles after the recent event. So the next slide, I'm going to look at Great Yarmouth. Great Yarmouth's an interesting one because we've actually got mixed risk across the town, because we've got parts of erosion in the South Denes. We've also got flood risk from the River Yare and the Waveney, and where the confluence is, and Braden Water. So there's a complex risk in the town. You've got what would broadly fall under river related risk, and then some coastal risk, but we've also within the town, it's a complex mix of industrial, commercial and residential, and significant deprivation. What that means, although deprivation is is looked at as part of flood defence grant and aid. Schemes don't easily stack up with regard to this, possibly because of that mix, and partly because the town is divided into a number of distinct flood cells based on the topography. So it's sort of pockets where you can gather the grant monies rather than being treated as this whole holistic area, which is partly what I mentioned earlier, what we're looking at as part of this project. So we're looking at this catchment-based approach. There is a current Environment Agency scheme where replacing or retiring flood walls around the town. We will be working with them alongside this and with Great Yarmouth Borough, particularly looking at possible options for the North Quay levelling up area. That's quite an interesting thing because it gives us an opportunity to perhaps put the onus on the developer of the North Quay site to come up with some interesting ways to deal with the damaged flood walls, or the tired flood walls, I'd rather say, really, around the North Quay area. And then also, Great Yarmouth, you're seeing significant, well, potential significant investment from the Vattenfall offshore wind farm, which are going to be based there. So we've actually got when you take into account Southwold and Thorpe Ness, we've got some, and Pakefield, we've got some very sort of diverse pilot sites. And the two in Norfolk are particularly interesting. If we go on to the next slide, I've got a couple of photos of Great Yarmouth. So the left-hand one is the South Deans, where you can just about see it, that the steps going down there are actually off the ground because we lost so much beach when that was taken. And then the right-hand photo is outside Asda, looking over the confluence of the rivers to the west of the town, where we've actually got some salt marsh developing. So there is opportunity there for some nurturing that nature and things like that. So it's going to be an interesting pilot site, an interesting project. Hopefully that's gives you a bit of a flavour of what we're doing. I didn't want to go too much detail, and I'd like you to be just enough to get the cogs turning and a bit of an update on what we're thinking about with this. But if anyone's got any questions, please let me know.
Well, Charles, thank you very much indeed. A lot to think about on that. And we have a question from Noel. Noel?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to point out, I put a link in the chat there and an explanation that unfortunately when they posted the link, they put the date of the first data that was ever made available. So it makes it look as if all this data is out of date, but it does actually contain a source of up-to-date data. And could I just say that obviously in conjunction with Hemsby and its economic value, that there is further research going on with some very clever use of mobile phone data that's really proving the point that was just made there about Hemsby being a sort of a hub for visitors coming to the area. So really just trying to point out there's a source of information there people might like to go and have a look at. The 2019 extended data is the best, but there is this really very exciting new data coming in that's proving some of the things that people have said for many years, and the value of the economy is actually much higher than the 88 million that was quoted. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noel. Thank you. Charles, do you want to come back on anything there?
Yeah, I think this is really important, really, that it's this idea of getting this catchment-based approach and looking at how these coastal communities service the wider area. And anything any information and data we can gather, such as that mobile telephone data, sounds really interesting, and I think that's definitely something we'll try and pick up on.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? I have to say, looking at Cobham over on your picture on the right-hand side there, it looks very low to the sea, doesn't it? Very low to the water. I think that's a very good photograph showing some of the problem. Can I ask, Charles, this is for my own, I've noticed that at North Deans, at the beach seems to be a large collection of sand has grown up, especially around Britannia Pier area. Do we have any reason for this?
I'm not sure. I think probably the best person to speak to would be my colleague Colin Bye, but I think the North Deans has been sort of accruing sand for quite some time, with the dunes coming from the sort of promenade road there have slowly been developing for quite a long time, but it's generally due to the wave action that we have. You know, if we've got less of a turbulent wave action in that area, which is a bit flatter, I suppose, it's going to build up. But yeah, it's something that we could definitely look at. We're actually looking at increasing the way that the sort of regularity, or looking at ways that we can increase the regularity that we monitor our beaches and get an understanding of where the sediment goes, where it's try and get an understanding of where it goes when it leaves the beach too, and what it's doing out at sea and where it's coming back from. But it's one of them things where I think you can never have too much information. So it's something that we are looking at.
Right, thank you very much, Charles. If there's no other questions, we will move to item 8. Before actually discussing the next date of the meeting, I'd just like to quickly thank my predecessor in the seat for really incredible amount of work, of really valuable and good work over the preceding years. And I'd just like to, and if I feel embarrassed that this isn't an actual physical meeting where she can not hear our resounding applause for all that work. So for the next meeting, we have the 11th of July, and we request any items of business that people would like to propose. Please do that through the usual channels. And now I'll just say, is there any other business? If there is no other business, and it's just 2 minutes before 12 o'clock. Oh, Peter, please come in.
Can you all hear me okay?
Thank you.
I'm the chair of Lessingham with Hempstead Nichols on Sea Parish Council, and we've had an issue recently where the tow piles on the seawall have been corroded badly through, and the sea has been taking a cavity out underneath the wall. The Environment Agency made repairs last autumn whereby they drilled vertically through the bottom of the seawall and pumped in concrete to try and reinforce it. Unfortunately, I think they had a lot of difficulties doing it because the sea, when they bored the holes, the sea then promptly filled them up with sand again because they didn't immediately fill them with concrete. This was all sucked out with, but since the sand has scarred away and the wall is accessible again, the bottom walls, there's appreciable voids between the pumped concrete and the wall. Also, the work was supposed to plug the holes in the tow piles, and it clearly hasn't. And I just want people to be aware that, you know, people down here are worried following Hemsby and other, and of course Haysborough just up the coast, that you know, the standard of work doesn't seem to have been properly achieved, really. I just want to make that point. Have you all got that okay?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. If perhaps somebody from the Environment Agency, which is responsible for that piece of wall, is still available to comment.
Could I come in on that?
Yeah, Gary, please do.
Well, we did. I don't know if you were around at the beginning of the meeting, but we did discuss this
Oh, sorry.
at the beginning. And you're absolutely right. When we do these kind of repairs, we rely on continuing low beach levels to be able to jet out and grout the voids. Now the beach levels did raise, so there was a small section we couldn't do. We are aware of that. It'll be picked up in future programs, and we're very grateful to, I don't know if it was yourself or your community that go out there and take pictures and let us know of these things. We do inspect them regularly, but you know, we can't be out there as often as the local community are. So we are grateful for that. We are aware of it, and it will be dealt with. I think Marath sent an email to yourself and others a few days ago, and we'll get a response to you.
Yeah. It's I think it's just a case of, you know, obviously these things cost money to be done, and I think if people aren't aware that it's not completed properly, you know, obviously pays it then to do it later on as well. So yeah, as long as it's been addressed, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm glad you feel. I hope that puts your mind slightly at rest, Peter.
Yes, I mean,
like all of us representing this area of wall, we are in constant. We are in constant worry about it. But yes, very much, Gary. Thank you for your work, and I appreciate it. As you can see, the wall behind me was only built by two blokes without a hard hat or a flashy jacket between them, so they lasted remarkably well. So anyway, so I will call an end to the meeting, and thank you all very much for your attendance. I look forward to seeing you all in the future, I hope. And Angie, thank you again for everything. Remarkable work. And so, goodbye. Thank you very much indeed.